Two men, Eberhard Anheuser and Adolphus Busch, teamed up to transform Anheuser-Busch from a simple neighborhood brewery into the famous beer maker America knows and loves today. Beyond the famous beer, however, generations of the Anheuser-Busch families have endured personal troubles. Eberhard Anheuser was born in 1806 in what would later become Germany. He was married with children when he came to America, landing in Ohio in the early 1840s. He initially worked as a candlemaker and in the soap manufacturing business before moving to St. Louis, Missouri. By 1852, Anheuser had partnered with Larson Riggs of Riggs & Company, manufacturers of candles, lard oil, and soap, but he would pursue a whole other business endeavor following the death of his wife, Dorothea, in 1854. In 1860, one of Anheuser's clients, the Bavarian Brewing Company, went into bankruptcy. Rather than lose money on what the company owed him, Anheuser purchased and renamed it the E. Anheuser & Company Bavarian Brewery. He also met up with a young supplier, Adolphus Busch, who had likewise immigrated from present-day Germany. Busch soon took a liking to one of Anheuser's daughters, Lily. Meanwhile, Busch's brother Ulrich fell in love with another of Anheuser's daughters, Anna. The couples were wed in a double ceremony in 1861. A few years later, Anheuser began having trouble making ends meet at his brewery, so his son-in-law, Busch, stepped in as his new partner. Adolphus Busch was an excellent marriage prospect for Lily Anheuser. He had first immigrated to New Orleans in 1857 before making his way to St. Louis. He was working as a steamboat inspector when his father died 2 years later. Young Busch inherited a large amount of money and used it to open his own brewery supply business. Just after his marriage to Lily Anheuser, Busch also served in the Civil War for 3 months and received an honorable discharge. Upon his return from the war, Busch rejoined his father-in-law's business. City directories show him as a co-owner of Anheuser's company, and he was able to buy out a third owner in 1865. He also encouraged continuous reinvestment of company profits, leading to increased sales. But it was not until 1874 that Busch and Anheuser became partners in an official capacity. 2 years later, the most famous of their brews, Budweiser Lager beer, premiered. In 1879, the company was finally renamed Anheuser-Busch. By 1880, annual production at Anheuser-Busch had increased to over 140,000 barrels. The company was well known across America, but the elderly Anheuser had long been in failing health when the St. Louis Globe-Democrat reported his death on May 3rd. The newspaper also noted him as the, quote, originator in the city of bottled beer on a larger scale. His official cause of death was throat cancer, and he was buried in St. Louis's Bellefontaine Cemetery with only a small marker bearing his name. Eberhard Anheuser left behind a sizable estate that included valuable stock in his company, as well as over $7,000 in cash, nearly $200,000 in today's money. Anheuser's wealth was left to all of his children except William. Exactly what the problem was remains unknown, but William only received $1 from his father's estate. With Eberhard Anheuser's estate settled, Adolphus Busch became president of Anheuser-Busch. In his time as head of the company, he was the first to incorporate refrigerated railroad cars to transport beer, and he built a beautiful mansion next to the brewery to keep an eye on operations. By 1885, the company was the leading brewery in St. Louis, and Busch was the first brewer to sign a labor union agreement where workers went on strike in 1891. By the late 1890s, everyone in America was drinking Budweiser. While Anheuser-Busch flourished, though, Adolphus Busch's family life remained difficult. Although Lily Busch gave birth to 13 children between 1862 and 1884, 3 girls died as babies, 1 son died at the age of 15, and 3 other boys had succumbed to, quote, appendix-related medical conditions by mid-adulthood. One of them, Carl, was born with disabilities and remained an invalid for life. The only son to survive into adulthood was August Anheuser-Busch. In 1906, Adolphus Busch caught pneumonia, causing health problems for the rest of his life. By 1913, he was still in bad health when he sailed to Germany to visit his vacation home. After falling ill on a hunting excursion, Busch died in his sleep. Left behind was an estate valued at around $60 million as August Anheuser-Busch Sr. took over his father's company. Afterward, Lily Busch resumed traveling to Germany, which ended up causing a load of trouble thanks to the outbreak of World War I. Lily finally returned to America in 1918 to claim Adolphus's estate, but the alien property law had allowed California's government to seize the property. Lily, they said, was a German-American whom they feared would exhibit, quote, pro-German sentiments. The Marysville Daily Appeal was one of several newspapers to report the Busch estate seizure, but Lily ultimately proved, quote, she was indeed a loyal citizen of the United States. 10 years after Lily's death in 1928, Busch Gardens closed at the Pasadena mansion. Today's Busch Gardens in Florida, however, remains as a tribute to the Busch family.
Discover the unexpected worlds of the Anheuser-Busch theme parks. Busch Gardens, Tampa.
Adolphus Buppy Busch Orthwein was the son of Adolphus Busch's daughter Clara, who inherited a portion of her father's estate. Even with Prohibition and the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, Anheuser-Busch prospered, selling off real estate and inventing the first refrigerated box truck to keep afloat. But the success of companies like Anheuser-Busch spurred several kidnappings for ransom, and the Busch family itself was a prime target. On New Year's Eve 1930, 13-year-old Buppy was riding in the family limousine when a masked gunman jumped atop the car, ordered the driver out, and drove away with the boy inside. The family formed a search party, and by morning, the kidnapping was front-page news. As the frantic search unfolded, the family offered a reward for any information about him. Buppy, meanwhile, was taken to a house and tied to a chair with a bag placed over his head. The family was contacted the next day, but no ransom was demanded, just the news that Buppy was being returned unharmed. His kidnapper, Charles Abernathy, turned out to be a poor father of 7 himself and had even fed the boy during the ordeal. Abernathy fled, but was later apprehended and sent to prison. As Buppy Orthwein's family healed from his kidnapping, August Anheuser-Busch Sr. was suffering from his own troubles. In 1920, when national prohibition hit, it was Busch who diversified the company, producing rail cars, non-alcoholic beverages, and even ice cream to survive. By the time Prohibition ended in 1933, less than 200 breweries were left in America, but Anheuser-Busch was among them. Things only got worse in 1934, though, when Busch began suffering from heart disease, dropsy, and gout. Dr. P.E. Rutledge would later testify that he gave the ailing man morphine one night in February, after which Busch asked his chauffeur to, quote, turn on the radio and get some music. But as the chauffeur did so, he heard a shot ring out. Busch had shot himself just below the heart, leaving a note reading, "Goodbye, precious mommy and adorable children." August Gussie Busch Jr. took over Anheuser-Busch in 1946. The author of the book Bitter Brew, The Rise and Fall of Anheuser-Busch and America's Kings of Beer, described Gussie as kind and fun, yet vindictive, an alpha Busch with insatiable appetites who was a, quote, barroom brawler. He was also a natural at selling beer. But while life may have been sweet for Busch, it wouldn't last. In 1974, Busch's youngest child, 8-year-old Christina, was killed in an 8-car accident on her way home from school. Thankfully, Christina's brother Andrew, who was also in the car, survived. According to Forbes, shortly after her funeral, another of Gussie's children, August Busch III, began conspiring against his father to take over Anheuser-Busch. When Gussie tried to sell the company to R.J. Reynolds instead in 1975, Busch III successfully deposed his father and wrested away control of the company. In 1976, another son, Peter Busch, made the news after he killed his own best friend. Author Peter Hernan says Peter Busch was, quote, infatuated with guns and had already accidentally shot himself in the leg when he met up with David Leaker, son of the president of So Good Potato Chip Company. The pair were at Grant's farm when, according to Busch, he tossed a loaded Colt .357 handgun on his bed and it went off, striking Leaker and killing him. Leaker was buried at St. Louis's Valhalla Cemetery as the investigation continued. In the end, the police concluded that the gun was actually within a few feet of Leaker's face when it went off. Busch was charged with manslaughter. Despite the charge and Busch's guilty plea, the man never spent a day in jail. He did get 5 years probation, which understandably caused some frustration. Workers' Power magazine sneered, "You can get away with murder if your dad owns St. Louis." The unscathed Busch eventually moved to Florida, where he found success as a beer distributor. In 1983, August Busch IV, son of August Busch III, was a student at the University of Arizona when his black Corvette crashed at what locals called Dead Man's Curve. Hours later, a sheriff's deputy found the body of bartender Michelle Frederick near the rolled car, who had apparently been ejected from the vehicle. Inside the Corvette, which was registered in his name, was a wallet, jacket, and revolver belonging to Busch. Deputies forced their way into his home and found him with a sheet around his waist and dried blood on his chest. Busch was treated for a skull fracture, but his blood and urine samples were mysteriously lost, so he was never charged with anything. Then, in 1985, Busch was involved in a police chase in St. Louis until they shot out his tire. When he explained he thought kidnappers were chasing him, the officers changed his tire for him and let him go. Soon after, Busch joined Anheuser-Busch as chief of marketing. In 2006, the company announced he was replacing his father as president and CEO. But more trouble was ahead. When August Busch IV was made president of Anheuser-Busch in 2006, the company was stumbling. Production had peaked in 1988 with 50.4 million barrels sold. During the 1990s, Busch IV had initiated some stellar marketing ploys, including the Budweiser Frogs, and in 2001, Bud Light surpassed Budweiser as the #1 beer in America. Add in the successful Super Bowl commercials, and here was a company that was clearly on top. Then, for the first time in company history, someone outside the family, Peter Stokes, was hired to run things. Things started going downhill. 2 years later, Miller Beer filed a suit against Anheuser-Busch, claiming employees were putting Queen of Carbs stickers on Miller products in stores. And by the time Busch IV took over, national taste had changed, and liquor was outselling beer. New products, including Jekyll and Hyde liquor and an alcoholic energy drink, failed miserably. And then in 2008, Belgian company InBev presented a $46.3 billion takeover bid. In spite of Busch IV proclaiming no such sale would, quote, happen on his watch, his hand was inevitably forced as the sale became final at $52 billion. News of InBev's purchase included words like devoured and hostile takeover as Busch IV was deposed. While August Busch IV reeled over the takeover of Anheuser-Busch, yet another tragedy developed. In December 2010, he found his girlfriend Adrienne Nicole Martin dead in his St. Louis home. It was a double whammy, seeing as how author Julie McIntosh had just published a scathing new book called Dethroning the King, a hostile takeover of Anheuser-Busch, an American icon. Busch said he believed Martin may have overdosed on trazodone, which she had been taking to help her sleep. Authorities verified that there were no signs of foul play. Martin was a model who wanted to be an art therapist and help children. Her death deeply affected Busch IV, who called the incident the saddest thing I've ever dealt with. As reporters capitalized on his extravagant, sometimes wild lifestyle, even his ex-mother-in-law was quick to defend him as a hardworking man. Busch himself said that the sale of Anheuser-Busch sent him into a deep depression. In 2017, he was arrested in an intoxicated state while trying to fly his helicopter in his own residential neighborhood. Dogs, guns, and prescription drugs were found on board, the latest tragic turn in the history of the Anheuser-Busch Dynasty. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call or chat online with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK 8255 or text HOME to the crisis text line 741-741.